Good morning, my name's Matt Cooper. I'm a member of ARAP and I have the privilege of being the chairman of the project steering group for this research. Welcome to today's webinar presenting CIRIA's Good Practice Guide, which is titled C792, the methodology for quantifying the benefits of offsite construction. We do recognise that that's not the catchiest of titles, so we're now referring to the work as the Janssen report, after its lead author, Tertia Janssen van Vuren, from the Laing O'Rourke Centre for Construction, Engineering and Technology at the University of Cambridge. We've got a great programme and speaker lineup in store for you today. This is the report that we're meeting to discuss. If you've not done so already, please can you download it from the link on the screen. Just to set the scene before we go into the presentations, I'd like to explain why we commissioned this report. MMC, Modern Methods of Construction, has long been hailed as a way forward for the way that we should deliver our buildings and infrastructure. We've talked about the benefits that MMC and a more manufacturing-based approach could deliver for decades. You know, from before Latham and Egan in the 1990s, right through to Mark Farmer's more recent Modernise or Die. The case has been made for MMC over and over again, and many in government, industry get it, and we've got it for a long time. The government has put construction industry at the heart of UK industrial strategy with its construction sector deal, which promotes digital technologies, offsite technology, offsite manufacturing, and whole life asset performance. But it's still yet to take off in the way we would like to see it take off. There's still barriers to overcome before we can realise the benefits promised, but as yet unproven. So we need to commit and invest in the MMC industries and supply chains if we're going to change our industry and truly modernise. And as we know, commitment and investments need a compelling business case with benefits that show a return on that commitment and investment. So this report sets out methodologies that will allow us to measure benefits in clear, consistent manner so that we can clearly demonstrate and compare quantifiable benefits in a like-for-like comparison so that industry can buy into it with measures that span different societal and economic drivers that have a value that we can measure in the buildings and infrastructure that we deliver. So just finally, our hope is that this research will provide the industry and its stakeholders the tools to make informed choices on how we procure and deliver our built environment, and to help us increase the rate of change to unlock the benefits that MMC has promised us for so long. During today's programme, we're going to hear a little bit about CIRIA and the work that they do, and the Laing O'Rourke Centre for Construction, Engineering and Technology. The research team will present the research process that led to this report, and we'll hear a transport sector perspective on the promising value of using this methodology. Finally, we'll close with some reflections and a discussion using your questions. We're delighted to welcome 6 speakers and panellists with us today, and I'll introduce them to you throughout the programme. Let's see if we can see the poll on the screen. So the statement is, we use a consistent methodology to measure project performance. Could you just pick one of those if you agree, strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree? Let us know. Let's give it a few seconds. Okay, let's see the results. Okay, so there's a fair mix between you agree and you disagree. And the question was about using a consistent methodology to measure project performance. One of the things that I think we discovered within this research was that the methodology might be consistent within certain organisations, but it certainly isn't consistent across the industry. And what I'd like to do now is to move to Professor Cam Middleton, who's Director of the Laing O'Rourke Centre for Construction, Engineering and Technology at Cambridge. Cam's a civil engineer with broad infrastructure experience, especially in bridges. He's led the research team working on this offsite report, and he's going to give you a brief overview of the work that the centre does. Over to you, Cam.
Thank you very much, Matt, and hello to everyone. My name's Cam Middleton, and I'm the Laing O'Rourke Professor of Construction Engineering at the University of Cambridge and Director of the Laing O'Rourke Centre of Construction Engineering and Technology. Now, the Laing O'Rourke Centre was introduced 10 years ago, and it's a strategic partnership that's been set up between the Department of Engineering at Cambridge, the Judge Business School, and Laing O'Rourke, which is widely recognised to be at the vanguard of the digital revolution and implementing modern methods of construction that we are actually looking at and discussing today. Now, our goal is to fulfil a shared vision of transforming the industry through pioneering research and by further educating the emerging leaders of our industry for tomorrow. Now, the way our centre aims to drive this transformation is to really focus on productivity, performance and sustainability industry. And to do that, we've chosen 3 core areas of focus. And the first of these is in education, where we've created quite a unique and highly successful construction engineering master's degree. And this is a leadership program which offers professionals the opportunity to explore the future of industry alongside leading government, business and academic experts. Now, the reputation of this program continues to grow as industry acknowledges the power of this course to drive change. And as a result, we're getting an increasing number of professionals from a wide range of parts of our profession. And this is leading to a growing cadre of alumni who are moving into leadership positions in our industry from which they can actually affect the change and implement the knowledge that they've learned on this degree. And when setting this up, we actually explored all over the world. And to our knowledge, this really is quite a unique leadership program that provides opportunities that you cannot get anywhere else in the world. Now, the second pillar is in relation to research, and we've built a substantial portfolio of collaborative research projects that are specifically targeted at dealing with industry challenges. And the third and most recent part of our strategic partnership is in thought leadership and policy. And we're pursuing research which is aimed at providing the evidence base to underpin and inform key policy decisions for government and the industry. Now, this report today that we are presenting here is a perfect example of how our research can fulfill this critical role and have a direct and immediate impact on the industry. Now, there are 4 overarching themes to our research portfolio, which are directly linked to the key challenges identified in the government's construction strategy. And these revolve around procurement, productivity, carbon, and skills. Now, these advantages are only going to be achieved if we focus not on 3 specific areas which cut across all of these themes. And these will provide the tools that will catalyse the transformation required. So our research has been focused on being at the forefront of, firstly, the most advanced digital engineering solutions. Secondly, developing the platforms and configurators that are required for implementing modern methods of construction and design for manufacture and assembly. And thirdly, by incorporating whole life performance principles in all aspects of the work we do. Now, we all recognise that the 4th industrial revolution that will bring us unprecedented opportunities to modernise construction through the exploitation of information and the new technologies that can inform and underpin better decision making. And the Laing O'Rourke Centre is working in close collaboration with industry, with government, and with our academic partners to be at the heart of this transformation agenda. So with that introduction, I'll pass back to Matt. Thank you.
Thanks, Cam. So next on the agenda is a pre-recorded presentation by Tertia Jansen van Veren. Tertia is a research associate with the Laing O'Rourke Centre, and she is the lead researcher working on this report and guide. And Tertia will now introduce the guide, the methodology, quantifying the benefits of offsite construction, henceforth known as the Janssen report. Over to you, Tertia.
Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar about our report, Methodology for Quantifying the Benefits of Offsite Construction. Whilst we're disappointed that our original launch event had to be cancelled, we hope that this intervening time has given you the opportunity to download and read the report, and we hope that you enjoy this virtual webinar. In our presentation today, we don't have time to go into every aspect of the report, so I'm going to give you an overview of the research approach followed and highlight a few important points. The level of interest that we have already received about this report, during the research and even prior to publication, highlights that offsite construction is really a key aspect of today's construction industry. In this report, we've used a broad understanding of the term offsite construction. Any construction activity that removes construction from the final site and with units or elements constructed in facilities away from site and then brought to site for installation. There are many perceived benefits of offsite construction that are used to drive the adoption and the promotion thereof, and these include things like a shorter build schedule, so shorter time on site, improved construction quality, better health and safety, lower environmental impact, and so forth. However, there's minimal objective evidence-based research to validate and quantify these benefits. This is true in both academic and industry literature and studies. If we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, we see that over the past 30 years, there have been many strategic reports that have highlighted the challenges facing the construction industry with recommendations on how to fix this, starting as long ago as 1994 with the Laing report, and then famously in 1998 the Egan report, Rethinking Construction, and then more recently 2016 the Farmer Review, and 2017 the Industrial Strategy, and 2018 the Construction Sector Deal. Several of these reports mention the potential of offsite construction to address some of the construction industry's challenges and failings. So why did we think it was necessary to write another report about offsite construction? So as we've just noted, there are many potential benefits that could improve the industry's performance, but there's little evidence to back this up. Our aspiration with this research was to quantify these benefits that are attributable to offsite construction. It is important to acknowledge that there may be many factors that inhibit or act as barriers for people to take up offsite construction, with a lack of evidence just being one aspect. But nonetheless, we believe it is valuable to have a robust understanding of how offsite construction benefits projects. Through this research project, we set out to establish a consistent and repeatable methodology for evaluating project performance, with the intention of determining how offsite construction impacts or influences project outcomes, to what extent these project outcomes are impacted by your construction approach, and whether the expected benefits are delivered. It was important to us as a research team that this report was relevant to industry. So we set up a project steering group right at the beginning with over 20 different organizations, from contractors to clients and consultants. And they have fed into every step of the way of this research, and we are very grateful for their input. Before we dive into detail, there's several things to note. Firstly, this report is not a how-to on offsite construction. It doesn't tell you when offsite construction is most appropriate and how to incorporate it on your project. Secondly, we've adopted a broad approach to understanding offsite construction, as I mentioned earlier, so we're not only speaking about volumetric, modular, or panelized. It's a broad approach, and a broad approach that follows the modern methods of construction definition framework. And thirdly, whilst offsite construction is used in both infrastructure and building projects, it became apparent very quickly that we weren't going to be able to address both infrastructure and building with one report and methodology. So we decided to focus on buildings. And also, this is meant to be a generically applicable overarching framework and not specific to only one type of building project. We'll now look at the project objectives and look at the process of how we research the quantification of the benefits of offsite construction. This research was carried out in a series of steps to help focus the outcomes. The first is the identification and definition of metrics. So in this step, we looked at what are those aspects on a project that we expect to be impacted by the construction approach. So looking beyond only the capital costs, we wanted to look more broadly at the broader project, the broader construction environment, and then more widely look at the societal impacts, such as workforce quality of life, community benefits, and the benefit to industry. So for each of these metrics, For each of these areas, we had to define metrics and look at ways to define these where it's consistent with boundaries of assessment to ensure that the metrics can be measured with consistency across different companies and projects. The second step was to bring these metrics together into a methodology that could be used by project stakeholders to review construction projects and evaluate outcomes. Important to note that because this methodology is generic, there's no weightings applied to metrics, because that's very specific to the project type and the client and the project team as to what metrics may be more important than others. So it's all equal, yeah, no weightings applied. We wanted to test our methodology by on actual delivered construction projects. So we collected project data and we got case study projects from willing members of our project steering group and other interested parties as well. And our final step was the systematic review of these case studies to analyze the delivered results and outcomes and to determine if and how offsite construction impacted these. So this starts the creation of the evidence base about the performance of projects and how construction approach influences these outcomes. Very important to clarify that this is not a hypothetical comparison. So it's not taking one project that is constructed using one approach, such as volumetric modular, and looking at what would the outcomes be. And then if we had to take the same project and construct it using a different approach, such as traditional brick and block or panelized, and hypothesizing what those outcomes would be and then comparing, or what is the benefit of the different approaches. We felt that that approach, whilst useful in some cases, was not what we wanted to achieve with this research, and does not create this evidence base of actual delivered outcomes. So now that you have this overview of the research process followed, we'll look into more detail at this first step of identifying and defining metrics. Through reviewing academic and industry literature, as well as consultation with our project steering group, we established several key areas of impact within which metrics could be grouped. So we've got things like cost, time, quality, health and safety, and labour requirements, and those are really specific to the project. And if you go slightly more broadly, you've got the environmental considerations, the community around the construction site, local disruption, life cycle considerations, and then even more broadly, if you look at the societal impacts, workforce quality of life, wider industry benefits and wider community benefits. For each of these areas of impact, we looked for specific metrics that could be used to measure project performance. And wherever possible, we sought to use existing methods to make it as easy as possible to adopt. As many companies and many organizations are already measuring many of these aspects in certain ways, we wanted to adopt already used methods to make it as easy as possible. This was an area that we engaged heavily with the project steering group to ensure the relevance to industry. However, even in our small subset with just 20 to 30 members, we could not reach complete agreement on what is most important or how to measure this. And I think this really highlights the challenge that exists in creating a consistent methodology across industry. Now, to show you an example of quite a familiar area of impact, I'm going to look at some of the metrics we used in cost. So this is a table out of the report showing some of the metrics under the heading of cost. We've got, so alongside total construction costs, like the final actual cost and the predicted cost, we've also got the cost of the construction works. So to establish consistency, we've used things like the RICS elements, quantify, so for all projects, what was the cost of just those elements of the construction. And then we've got the associated construction costs. So here we've got main contracts, prelims, and contingencies, risks, and again, defining those according to the RICS elements. To give you an understanding, so why we've included prelims is that prelims are noted in several reports and studies as potentially being lower cost on offsite construction projects because there's less setup required, there's less scaffolding, shorter time on site, that kind of thing. So we wanted to see, does this actually translate into practice with lower prelims on projects with higher levels of offsite construction? And similarly with contingencies and risk, if a project has a greater predictability and greater certainty in the outcomes, if there's a higher level of offsite construction, does this translate into lower contingencies and risk costs attributed on a project? And then we've got the construction cost certainty, so to try to establish whether there's greater certainty, greater predictability of projects with a higher level of offsite construction than traditional projects. And as I've explained for each of these, we've done that in the report. For every metric, we have a little paragraph explaining why we think it's valuable to be measuring this, have a little bit of a discussion as to challenges around measuring, yeah, a bit more detail. So it gives you an understanding of the process behind selecting the metrics. Alongside these metrics, we also need information about the project itself to ensure that we can make fair comparisons and to try to understand how other factors, apart from the construction methodology, may have influenced the results. So, for example, intuitively, we know that a secondary school in the Midlands is not the same as a primary school constructed in the centre of London. So how do we differentiate these projects? And I've just got a selection of the key project descriptors that we asked for when we collected project information. So here we've got project type. So is it a primary, secondary? Is it an all through school? Work type, is it new build? Is it new build and extension? The regional location, so is it in the Midlands? Is it in London? The gross internal floor area, and then very importantly, the pre-manufactured value, which gives us an understanding of the level of maturity of offsite construction. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that later. Once we had our metrics and methodology, we wanted case study projects to test it on. So to narrow our focus of the research and provide meaningful results, we decided to select a specific sector. And again, in consultation with the PSG, the project steering group, we chose the education sector, looking at schools projects. Several reasons for this, but primarily because within schools, offsite construction has been applied with some level of maturity, meaning that we're hopefully going to be able to get projects constructed with a high degree of offsite construction where we could look at actual delivered results, and as well as across the spectrum to traditional projects and look at delivered results and be able to compare it. The ideal situation would be to measure all the metrics across the full life cycle of the assets and get a comprehensive assessment of outcomes. However, we relied on the information that was available and accessible on our case study projects, which resulted in a reduced list of metrics that we could measure. As all of the organisations who provided case study projects were contractors, this meant that our project results are construction phase centric. So we don't get this full life cycle look at a project, but we're only able to look at the construction phase. We received and analysed 46 projects from 6 different contractors, ranging from small contractors to multi-billion-pound organisations, with projects located across the UK with a variety of build solutions, procurement strategies, and contractor experience. The engagement of these contractors who provided data demonstrates a willingness to collaborate and share information to improve the construction industry, and we're so grateful for their input, because without them, we really wouldn't have been able to present much at all. So as I mentioned, our time is limited, so we'll briefly look at some of the findings of the research now. One of the first things that became clear very early on was that it would not be possible to definitively and quantitatively calculate the pre-manufacture value consistently across our 46 different projects. In industry currently, there seem to be 2 ways in which pre-manufactured value is calculated quantitatively, and these 2 calculations are put up. The first comes from the Construction Leadership Council's housing metrics, and the second from the Department of Education's Modern Methods of Construction framework tender. And unfortunately, on our project, neither of these calculations was able to be used consistently. So we therefore decided to use a traffic light ranking, a qualitative traffic light ranking, where largely traditional projects would be low, and on the other end of the spectrum, where projects using innovative or a large amount of offsite construction would be high. And this is not ideal, as it is difficult to ensure consistency, as what one person might think of as really kind of traditional construction, another person might think, oh, that's quite medium. There's quite a middle range of offsite construction there. But nonetheless, it provides us some way of correlating the level of offsite construction with the project outcomes. This chart shows the total installed construction cost on the vertical axis for each of our 6 contractors. So for example, contractor 1, we had 3 projects. One of them was medium PMV, so PMV is pre-manufactured value, and 2 of them were high PMV, and with a total installed construction cost of around £17 million. And interestingly, if you look at contractor 2, there's 3 low projects 3 medium projects and 7 high projects. But the total construction value of the 7 high projects, they're all of them are quite small projects compared to the 3 medium projects are bigger projects. Yeah, so this is the spread of information, the spread of projects we've got across our 6 contractors. This chart shows the regional distribution of projects received and highlights the difficulties that exist in comparing projects and the different behaviours that can be expected. For example, contractor 5, all of their projects were located in London, where there may be a cost premium on labour or materials, but also they might have similar clients, similar construction teams, so they're able to transfer learning and experience across projects, hopefully. And contractor 2, conversely, if you look at them, their projects are located all over across the country, from the Midlands to East of England to Yorkshire. So it's much more difficult for them to transfer learning and relationships across the different projects. Turning now to look at the actual project information that we received. So for each of our case study projects, we asked there was a list of 23 fields that we asked contractors to fill in about the project. For each of these, you can see, so for example, for total construction cost, the actual and predicted, 100% of our projects, all 46 were able to report on that. And similarly for time on site, actual and predicted, all 46 projects gave us information on that. Whereas if you look at the energy rating, so the rating from the energy performance certificate and the energy usage, less than half of the projects were able to give us information on this. So this is just a subset of the metrics that we asked for, just to give you an idea of the range of how complete the information that we got was. On average, projects were only able to complete 15 of the 23 fields. So again, it's very difficult, even on our small subset case study, 46 projects, even on our reduced list of metrics, we weren't able to get a full picture of what was happening. We'll now have a brief look at some of the overall findings of the report. One of the first things we found when looking for ways to measure and quantify the impacts of offsite construction was that the information that we need is simply not collected. So for example, many reports and studies mention that offsite construction reduces vehicle movements on site. So in our area of impact, we had local disruption. So one of the metrics that we selected there was number of vehicle movements. However, in practice, contractors do not generally track or record this in any way that can be picked up at a high level. So there's no technical reason for this, because it could be deduced by delving into delivery and waste removal records. But this information is just simply not fed up into the high level way that can be found and reported. In a similar vein, another key finding is the difference between what ideally should be measured to quantify the impact versus what is practically able to be measured based on available information. A striking example for us of this was build quality. So logically, the cost of rework due to errors or poor quality would be a good indication of the build quality of a project, but information on this does not appear to be collected at all. The only information that is readily available is the number of defects. So this is rather unsatisfactory, because you could have many small, low consequence defects, and these are defects post handover to clients. It's a very defined point in the project that we could use, but there's no way to differentiate between many small defects and a few larger defects that may have higher consequence or be of more inconvenience to the client. In setting up how to measure the metrics and in analysing the case studies, establishing consistency across the industry was challenging. So for example, all projects report on cost, but it was not always clear if the cost that we were getting was including the same aspects. So for example, some projects, on some projects we received initially just net cost, not including profit, so that which is the total cost of the clients. Some excluded variations, whilst others included them. Some excluded external works or prelims. So for example, if a project was part of a larger group of projects. So yeah, establishing consistency is a big challenge. And related to this is the lack of detailed information, which makes it unclear to us to know what is included and what isn't. So for example, with construction waste figures, is this just construction waste? Does it include demolition and excavation waste? Or with construction energy usage, if we only get a total final figure in kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent without any breakdown of electricity or fuel type. There's no way to compare that to a project where we get the energy usage in kilowatt hours, because we don't have the conversion factors and the proportions. So in the analysed case studies, it was difficult to establish how the various project factors may have influenced the project results completely independently of the construction approach. So that's where I was touching on a bit with the key project descriptors. But it also includes other aspects such as the procurement strategy used by the client, the design approach. Was the project initially designed for offsite construction, or was it a traditional project that was then modified for offsite construction? And how might that have impacted the outcomes? And the last overall finding that I'll touch on today is that the qualitative impacts are still largely undefined. And it was really difficult. We had great difficulty in establishing quantifiable metrics for these qualitative aspects of offsite construction, where we believe there really is large benefit to be found, such as workforce quality of life and impact on the community. So while there are tools for quantifying social value through financial proxy values, these can generally only be evaluated very narrowly and through very specific concerted effort on a project, and not at a broad, high level across projects. So this difficulty is compounded as well when looking at the expected regional economic uplift that could be expected, where social value would be better understood at a regional level instead of focusing on a project. And an example where tension came up, especially in our project steering group discussions, was looking at projects with a high level of offsite construction. There may be planning requirements to employ local labour local to the construction site, but it's not taking into consideration the fact that perhaps with their high level of offsite construction, they're providing more stable long-term employment in an area local to the manufacturing facility and not the construction site. Turning now to look at some actual results from the case studies. Very briefly, we'll show you two graphs as a demonstration of what you can find in the report. And again, looking at costs simply because this is something that everyone is very familiar with. We'll look at the cost on the vertical axis in pounds per metre squared and the gross internal floor area of the projects across the horizontal axis. And if we bring these up, we'll see for our low PMV projects, this is the spread of results we received. And then if we bring up the medium PMV projects, very similar. And then with the high PMV projects, again, a very similar spread of results. This project over here is an outlier. And when we looked into it, we noticed that the total construction cost reported included all of the refurbishment work on the project, and it had a high degree of refurbishment work. So that's why it's so important to have these other key project descriptors that you can look into. So you're not just making blind comparisons, so you can drill down and see, okay, what's happening? Why is this one sitting so far? So from these results, there doesn't appear to be a correlation just for our subset of projects. So please bear in mind, this was really a small subset of case studies that we were able to look into. But we don't see any clear correlation between pre-manufactured value and the construction cost when normalized against the gross internal floor area. In the report, we use box and whisker plots to visualize the spread of results. And I know not everyone knows how to read these, so we have got a little descriptor in the report that shows you what's happening. But it's just to show the spread of project results. So this is your 25th percentile line, this is your median line, and that is your 75th percentile line, showing you almost like a bell curve of what's happening on your results. So low, medium, high, and if we group them all together using the same total construction cost, you can see there's not a huge difference across the different projects. So the report shows more of these graphs and goes into more details. Like if you look at just the construction cost or just the building work, how does that compare to total cost, and various interesting discussions looking at specific aspects. So I'm not going to go into more detail, but that's just a flavour of what you can expect. This research was a pilot test of the methodology on the case studies received, and the report ends with 3 suggestions on future research that could be conducted. So the first is to continue with data collection and to do this robustly so we can get project benchmarks and create an evidence base, and then we can then we can really start to see, is there a correlation between offsite construction and the expected predicted benefits. The second is to take this methodology and adapt and extend them so that they can be applicable to infrastructure projects. And work on this is already happening, and you'll hear from Joe shortly. And the third aspect is to do a detailed assessment of how offsite construction impacts social value. And we've detailed in the report like suggestions on how we think that this would be most valuable. To summarize, looking back over this research project as we draw this presentation to a close, we want to focus on what this report means to you as a stakeholder in the construction industry and what you can do. This research demonstrates that there's currently no consistent measurement or recording of project performance. And this does not mean that no metrics or KPIs are being measured. It's just that this is not happening according to a comparable framework. We are all measuring things, but we're measuring them differently. So we can't compare results from one project in one organization to results from another organization with great certainty. And this is not specific to projects with a high level of offsite construction. This appears to be happening across the board, whether it's traditional or volumetric. It's independent of construction approach. So there's therefore no robust evidence base against which to benchmark performance or to justify project decisions. We do believe that the construction industry should be able to achieve the benefits, the wide range of benefits, as is promoted in academic and industry literature. But in order to truly know what these benefits are and to quantify how these are related to the construction approach, specifically offsite construction, we need a fundamental change in how project performance is measured. And I'm now going to hand over to Cam, who leads us with a challenge in the Commission. What can you do?
Thank you very much, Tertia, for that. Now, firstly, may I start by sincerely thanking the organisations that Tertia referred to, who worked very closely with us in developing this methodology, because without their openness and their commitment to this report, it just simply wouldn't have been possible. Now, many of you will know from first-hand experience of the considerable benefits that can be achieved with using modern methods of construction centred around off-site construction. And these benefits are often particularly evident when it comes to dramatically improving program times and the cost savings as a result of it. However, what Tertia has shown is that despite the evidence from these exemplar projects, we found that the industry doesn't have a consistent approach to measuring performance, nor are we actually measuring many aspects of our work which could demonstrate the far wider project benefits and societal value that could be achieved by adopting modern methods of construction. And we would argue that it is this evidence base that would provide the greatest certainty that both clients and investors seek when making investment decisions. So what are the key issues? Well, really, as Tertia so clearly highlighted, although all organisations collect metrics of different forms to track direct project impacts such as cost, time, quality, etc., and many also measure some of the other broader performance measures that she referred to, perhaps the number of apprenticeships employed or overall waste that could be generated on site, we found that there was a lack of consistency in how the KPIs were being measured, and this was even within individual companies, not just between companies. And we also have to remember that there's no single correct set of metrics or KPIs to measure performance. What really matters is that the metrics are consistent, that we're comparing apples with apples, and we're measuring the same parameters in the same way, so that these are comparable and, importantly, reproducible. Now, on this project, a eureka moment for me came when we suddenly realised that this methodology is not only applicable to quantifying the benefits of off-site construction, but actually, if you think about it, this could be applicable for quantifying the benefits of construction as a whole. It's the same basic parameters, certainly at the top level, in all of the different areas of construction. So what do we believe is needed now? Well, firstly, we'd invite you to try it out. Test these metrics. They've been developed in liaison and closely with industry, and what we need now is to get a consensus. Then we need to broaden out the methodology that was developed for school buildings to other sectors of the industry, such as transport, water, energy, etc. And as Tertia said, Joe will be talking about that in a minute. Many of the metrics will actually be the same across all sectors, but we need to have the opportunity for specific sector parameters and also organisational specific parameters. Now, a key point for all of the potential users is that this methodology doesn't involve major change to existing management processes. Most organisations already collect some of this data or much of this data on the top level KPIs, as well as some of the broader metrics. But in many cases, these will match exactly what you're already doing or merely suggest a minor tweak to those particular measurements. And the key again is to make sure you've all got consistency across your individual projects and across the businesses. And as a second step, we need to adopt this methodology that's been proposed to measure the wider project and societal benefits to help us understand the true value of the projects and the true value to your organisations and, importantly, to your clients and society. And a key challenge for the research community is to work closely with industry to develop these into a consistent set of metrics for those more difficult, harder to quantify social benefits, which by their nature will involve some form of qualitative measures. So we genuinely believe that this methodology presented here offers an opportunity for the industry to capture the true value and benefits to society of adopting modern methods of construction, and this would act as a catalyst for transforming construction and dramatically improve productivity across the industry. So with that, I'll pass back to Matt.
Thanks, Cam, and thank you very much, Tertia. I can see quite a number of questions coming in. Don Cartridge, Sykes, Andrew Barraclough most recently. To anybody else out there, please don't forget to submit your questions for Tertia or any of the speakers in the question box. So somebody who has used the metrics and has road tested, to use the pun, is Joanne Geddes, our next presenter. Jo is the lead engineering capability manager at Network Rail, and she has recently undertaken a part-time secondment with the Department for Transport to help the Transport Research Innovation Board explore how they might measure innovation across their portfolio. So Jo, can you share the insights from the use of this methodology in your transport sector?
Thank you, Matt. My substantive post is with Network Rail, where I've worked for about 10 years. But as Matt said, I recently did some work on behalf of the Department for Transport. And today I'm going to talk to you about the perspective that I have of the Janssen methodology through that piece of activity. So I was introduced to the methodology that we're talking about today through the piece of work that I was doing for a national board of the DFT. The board is known as the TRIB board, many acronyms in the world of government. This particular one stands for Transport Research and Innovation Board, and that board brings together funders and leaders in transport and innovation. The way in which they structure their work is through a number of different themes, and the particular piece of research that I was doing was commissioned against the theme of smart, digital, robotic and off-site construction and maintenance. The task that I was given was to look into how the DFT could measure value, success and the impact of innovation across transport projects. So it's quite a broad brief that I was given. My first thought about that was that it contained many nouns in there that were in fact entirely subjective and lack meaning without context. So I was thinking that what I actually needed was some kind of methodology that provided that meaning, that gave those subjective terms definition and enabled the DFT to make comparisons and identify opportunities, which I believe was implicit in the task that I was given. So in terms of how I would define those terms personally, I think I would look at innovation as being the scope of the projects that where the innovation is being carried out. The value is a definition of the measures, and the comparison comes from being able to provide those two pieces of information in a way which is consistent and enables like to be shared with like. So the slide that you can see at the moment really contextualises some of the scope and diversity that exists within the transport sector. So projects in this sector can be large, they can be time consuming, and they can be innately complex. So how can you compare value and innovation in a project which exists to construct an airport runway against a project which is replacing and electrifying rail? Well, you can see in these pictures that there are instinctively some synergies there. With my railway hat on, they're all what we would call in the railways linear assets. So there will undoubtedly be practice and methods in the use of building a motorway or a runway that will apply to rebuilding a railway. And we should absolutely be able to share our innovation across sectors and our learnings that stem from our project activity. So when I was invited to attend the presentation on the Janssen methodology, I immediately saw the potential of its ability to deliver exactly what the DFT were looking for. I saw a very simple, flexible and expansive approach that could be embedded quite simply into existing project delivery methods. The metrics and algorithms that Tersh has already spoken about could absolutely be made meaningful to the transport community. I think what really impressed me though was that it went beyond the traditional boundaries of the projects and looked at some of the things that Tersh has talked to you about, such as the secondary benefits. And for us in the railway, I guess that's things like biodiversity, waste, energy and carbon, the things which are probably familiar to all of us who are on this session. But it also goes another step. It goes into the societal impacts, which for government organisations is an extremely important factor. So to be able to relate and measure social value from government projects and innovations is immensely powerful. And I think this methodology will help us to do that. And it will also help us to embed, should we wish, relevant guidance, such as the existing thinking on carbon and waste. So I guess you're getting the theme here that I'm quite a big fan of this methodology. I think it's fantastic, and I remain excited by its potential. So I left my secondment with the DFT a couple of months ago, but the methodology lingered on with me in my brain, and I began to consider how it could be used within my own organisation. So our own asset portfolio is very diverse. What you're seeing on here are some examples of bridges. We've been building bridges since the Victorian era, and we continue to build them using innovative methods. We have to also consider innovation in how we manage these Victorian assets that we have. So it's definitely of relevance to us. At the heart of everything that we do in Network Rail is safety and performance. They are our key operational objectives. And every time we run a project to build a new bridge or maintain a new bridge, undoubtedly our safety and performance statistics are effective. So I do believe that the methodology has the potential to actually embed that thinking and those metrics and link project activity right through to organisational objectives. And another factor of our organisation is our structure. So we've recently entered another phase of what we call devolution. So we aren't one single business, we are a central business with a number of devolved businesses which exist at national level. So that gives us another level of complexity where we need to measure and compare and recognise good practice. So again, I think this is where the model can help us to do that and provide us with an information perspective on project data that we're not currently or consistently collecting. So this slide is really a summary of what I think is great about the model and what makes it so valuable. I'm not planning to read through all of them, but to make it work with some kind of transport focus, I recognise that it will involve some upfront work and effort to calibrate those metrics. But I do think a lot of the metrics that are already in place with the off-site flavour to the model would remain valuable. I also think that the process of calibration is a valuable process in itself, and it will bring together the community to have a shared understanding and consensus on terms. So, you know, I think the whole process from start to finish will help the transport sector enormously. There's a well-known saying that all models are wrong, but some are useful. My view on this is it's an extremely useful model, and I actually view it as an innovation in itself because it goes beyond what I've ever seen and experienced existing benefit models do. So just to bring this back to the original purpose of my DFT research, you can see in the black my original models from my research. Well, for me, the innovation, as I said up front, comes from the assessed projects that get pushed into the pipeline of this methodology. It's up to the transport sector to define what it determines innovation to be, and I think that goes beyond some of the traditional sort of technical solutions into things like business models, but that's up to the people who wish to use the model to define. The value comes very much from the specific metrics, which, as I said, are immensely tailorable. And by combining these two things, we enable a consistent method for comparison and for identifying opportunity, because I think this is actually what the DFT were asking for. So just to conclude where we're up to now, on exiting my secondment from the DFT, I left them with a very strong recommendation that we should look into this model. My recommendation was that we actually chose a small asset area. I identified their projects related to bridges, and we just push some of that data through and see what comes out of the other side. Within my own organisation, I've been very vocal about the benefits of this model, and I do think it presents us with something that we don't currently have. We have lots and bits and bats of this, but we don't have consistent methodology that we can run across our devolved business and our devolved asset portfolio. So again, a similar recommendation for my own Masters within Network Rail. Let's give it a go. Let's see how it flies and push some projects through it. Because in summary, I see this as a very, very powerful benefit model, which has potential in any project setting. And I do hope that it finds a place within the transport sector. And I hope that by running proof of concepts, it will start to allow information about opportunity and data to emerge and become transparent in a way that it currently isn't. So thank you very much for the honour of being here today and me the chance to talk about my thoughts on it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jo. We've now come to the discussion part of today's webinar. Excuse me. So before I introduce our expert panel, I can see that there are lots of questions coming in. Alex Hughes, Don Cox, I'll pick a couple of your questions shortly. To anybody else, if you have questions that focus directly to the panel, please enter it into the question box and we'll get through as many questions as we have time for before we've got a hard close at 12:30. So on to our panel discussion. I'm now delighted to welcome Professor Lord Robert Mair, Emeritus Professor of Civil Engineering and Director of Research at the University of Cambridge, and Keith Waller, who's the Programme Director of the Construction Innovation Hub. Welcome both. Robert, just as an introduction, Robert's a Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, Fellow of the Royal Society, and he was President of the Institution of Civil Engineers in 2018. He was appointed as an independent cross-bencher in the House of Lords in 2015 and is a member of the House of Lords Select Committee on Science and Technology. Keith is the Construction Innovation Hub's Programme Director. He's a Fellow also of the Institution of Civil Engineers. And in 2010, Keith was seconded into government with Infrastructure UK, the predecessor to the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. His work in government led to the publication of the UK's first National Infrastructure Plan, the development of the Infrastructure Cost Review, and the IPA's Transforming Infrastructure Performance Programme, published in 2017. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining. Robert, on the back of this report and what you've heard today, could you share any reflections on this work from perspectives in the industry?
Thank you, Matt. Well, can I start by congratulating CIRIA and the authors, Tertia Janssen and Cam Middleton, for this excellent and timely guide, as well as being colleagues of the two authors at Cambridge. As you've said, I'm a member of the House of Lords Science and Technology Select Committee, and in 2018 we undertook an inquiry into off-site manufacture for construction. Our report can be viewed on the House of Lords Select Committee website. I'm just going to make a few very brief comments about that. We considered, of course, the potential benefits and the drawbacks of off-site manufacture, and we looked at what actions the construction sector needed to take to drive further use of off-site manufacture. We had 10 oral evidence sessions in which there were 27 witnesses. We had a call for evidence, and we received about 80 written submissions. There are links to all of those in the digital version of our report, and I commend those to you. In particular, we examined the barriers faced by the construction sector in using off-site manufacture. And many of those barriers, such as lack of collaboration, attitudes to risk, can only really be dealt with by the sector itself. And that, of course, led to the construction sector deal promoted by the Construction Leadership Council as part of the industrial strategy. And that's an important step. I think, as the CIRIA guide rightly states, off-site manufacture has the potential to substantially improve the construction industry. However, many of the benefits are perceived benefits without hard evidence to back these up. And there is minimal objective evidence-based research to demonstrate these benefits in a quantitative and consistent manner. And that, of course, is where the CIRIA guide comes in. The authors are to be congratulated for tackling the very important issue, for trying to actually get a consistent methodology. And I feel sure that this excellent guide and its proposed methodology will be used by the industry for many years to come. So I congratulate the authors.
Thanks, Robert. Keith, it'd be interesting to see your perspective on the report and any comment on how it might shape the way forward for the development of modern methods.
Thank you for the question. So I think it's, as Robert says, it's an interesting study, and I think it reinforces many of the difficulties we're aware of for clients to make informed choices and for industry to build a case to invest in developing new capability, new products, new ways of working. And this lack of data, along with many other factors, can be help explain why the industry perhaps has been challenged in how it moves forward, how it transforms, how it adopts modern ways of working. But I think it's worth being clear that off-site is not always the answer. It's certainly not a means to its own end. But it's difficult to imagine, having said that if we are looking to decarbonise our sector, we're looking to drive towards net zero, we're looking to be more productive, have greater social impact, it's difficult to imagine how we can achieve that without adopting a much more modern approach to delivery. So without digitally enabled, smart, censored, manufactured solutions, we're not going to get to deliver the ambitions and the transformation the sectors need. In fact, since this report was published, we've moved on quite a lot in this space already in working out how we assess and move forward on this basis. And that's why the Hub program, the Construction Innovation Hub, is focusing not just on developing some of those technical solutions that delivered manufactured output, digital solutions, smart operation of our infrastructure, but the enabling framework which will allow those choices to be made to drive that transformation. And I draw your attention in particular to the work that we've been doing on our value framework. And if you look at the recently published Roadmap to Recovery for the CLC, that is explicitly referenced as an area we're going to develop and move forward and embed. We're already working with Department for Transport and many of their arm's length bodies. We're working with the Department for Education and a number of other government departments, including centrally, to work out how we can make informed choices that aren't focusing on how cheap can we build, but thinking about whole life performance, how it supports productive growth in the economy, how we get the right commercial and business cases written and decided that support that transformation. It's about thinking of value, not cost. We want value-based decisions on whole life performance, not cost-based decisions on capital projects. So there's a huge focus that we're looking at, not just in our technical program, but how we measure, assess and benchmark value throughout the whole life. So we're not interested in cheap, we're interested in driving greater value and supporting the ambition from the built environment to have greater social impact, reduce our environmental impact and support some of the broader economic activities that we'll need, particularly in a post-COVID world.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, things are definitely changing. Okay, can I now invite Joe, Tertia, Cam and Kieran back to the panel? I'll drop off the video so that we don't overfill the screen, and that will give me the chance to field some of the questions. There's some good questions coming through. Right, so following up on your comment, Robert, about the House of Lords Select Committee report, could you give us a bit of an update on insights as to how the outcomes and recommendations of that report have been received and implemented, and how this this methodology could be used to support any changes?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I think it's true to say that the report we produced was well received by government. The government had, just about the same time as we produced our report, announced what they called a presumption in favour of off-site manufacture. These are quite key words, and they were in effect saying that they were wanting to show a strong commitment to investing in off-site manufacture. And there were 5 government departments that were involved in that: transport, education, health, defence and justice. And I think the real question that we have asked ourselves is, what teeth is being provided by the government to actually back that up, the presumption in favour. And we in fact recommended in our report that government should develop and publish a series of key performance indicators against which the success of the presumption in favour could be assessed. So in other words, when tenders were being received, the government departments in question should actually ask very positively the question, well, has off-site manufacture been considered in the offer, and if not, why not? And I think the jury is still out at this point as to how much that's really happening. Keith, you might want to make a comment about that as well.
I think the jury is very much out, but what we're seeing with a number of government departments and a number of the arm's length bodies is perhaps an increased ambition to do that. I think Robert, Budget 2017 had said that they would adopt a presumption in favour of off-site by the end of 2019. As far as I'm concerned, I think we've passed that point, and it's not always clear exactly how they're considering that. We are seeing some departments and some agencies really looking at it properly and looking to work about not just doing off-site in terms of off-site construction, but looking to embed proper manufacturing process, proper consideration of whole life performance, rather than just doing what many clients have done in the past, which is by pimped up park homes. We need to move into doing proper things that deliver better social impact, reduce our environmental impact. But government departments do move at different paces. They do have existing frameworks that need to run their course. But I would be very surprised if government and the IPA and the Treasury, when we move into a spending round and a budget this year, aren't looking to put a bit more conditionality on how government spends its investment portfolio in projects, very much in line with the recommendation that Robert and his team made, because that we need to have a bit of teeth behind it rather than just a bit of goodwill. So I really support something that enables us to measure and allow people to make informed choices and hold them to account when they don't.
Thanks, Keith. Just a quick one on that. On Monday, the Construction Leadership Council published a roadmap to recovery for UK construction sector. Obviously, we're in difficult times. How do you think this methodology is going to dovetail with the industry recovery plan?
Well, I think the recovery plan, you'll see there's a lot of focus on digital, a lot of focus on manufacturing in terms of how government and industry can work forward. What they did explicitly mention in there was the value framework that we're developing. And of course, some of the elements of this report will feed into parts of that methodology. But of course, we're looking at how we use that value framework throughout the whole investment lifecycle, from the moment it becomes a policy idea, through business cases, through optioneering, through procurement, through design, through delivery, through operation and end of life. So having a value framework and a way of measuring against social impact, environmental impact, economic impact. So we're not just thinking about the project, but something Robert's been talking about for a long time, really focusing on whole life performance, understanding the existing built environment and how assets are performing, rather than a rush to build new things the whole time. So having that value framework embedded explicitly in the sector recovery plan, and a plan to embed those principles that we're developing through the hub into the way we're building and assessing projects and programs in the future is really important.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, Alex Hughes asked, is this methodology appropriate for housing? Tertia, I think it spans across the industries. Is that correct?
Yes. Thanks, Matt. So, as I said in the presentation, methodology hasn't been developed to be specific only to schools projects. It's just that we use schools projects to test them out. We wanted it to be generic, and we believe that if you had to take a housing project, these metrics could be used on housing projects as well. It might just be that if you were looking at housing projects, there would be additional aspects that you'd want to include and additional ways of looking at projects. So, for example, you'd have to add aspects in the project descriptor to look at, is the housing project, is it an estate development, is it flats or terraced housing, that kind of thing, to be able to compare your projects better. So yes, it should be applicable to housing.
Great, thanks. And there's one end from Richard Sykes. How much focus of the report is on environmental management and sustainability? He's commented on the lack of data in this sector. So how much weighting is the weighting applied, or is the metric just there and the weighting can be tailored according to whatever the business driver is? That's my understanding.
Exactly that, Matt. There's no weightings applied in the methodology itself. Weightings can be applied by specific project teams depending on what they believe is valuable and what they believe is important in the report. And there are certain environmental metrics in there that we have included in the report. But I do believe that this is one area that could be branched out to include additional aspects. So we've got the very traditional carbon, energy, water usage on construction projects listed in our report as metrics to use. But this could be broadened out and include aspects such as the material use, the type of material, is it recyclable, is it recycled, yeah, that kind of thing. So yeah, they are there in the report.
Okay, I've got one here. Which metrics would be most valuable to have data on for understanding the benefits of offsite construction? And are there other metrics not addressed in the report that you believe should be included in the methodology? I think that would be good for Joe. You've used the methodology, so which ones did you think were the most valuable, and were there others that you thought should be there?
Well, just to clarify, we haven't used the methodology in anger. It's just a recommendation that we've made to both DFT and Network Rail. I can't comment in terms of off-site construction specifically, but I was very impressed by the social value aspects, particularly if you're working in a government environment. I think you have to justify your case to the public, and it very much gives the opportunity to do that. I think I mentioned in my own presentation that I think if we were to implement it within Network Rail, I would look for some metrics that are very closely aligned to our operational objectives too. So I can't comment on anything with any background of having run the model, but I see the potential in doing so and the flexibility for it to be whatever you need it to be.
Thanks. One from Janet Dunnett. I'll cut to the chase. Does the project have links to or plans to work with government organisations to make this happen? Cam, I think you're probably best placed to answer that one.
Thanks, Matt. And yes, absolutely. And in fact, the presence of Keith here and Lord Mayor is an indication that throughout the government there's an interest in this work, and we are closely working through, for example, the Centre for Digital Britain, Centre for Smart Infrastructure and Construction in Cambridge, and through that to the Construction Innovation Hub. And we've already had some discussions on how we take this forward, because this is not a standalone bit of academic work that can just go out and be pushed out to others. This is actually being pulled by the industry, who formed, as Tertia said, closely using the metrics that are already being adopted. But really we've done two things. One, identify where there's inconsistency and suggest how we can tweak them to get consistency so that we can compare like with like. And secondly, identify the gaps in the areas particularly referred to by Joe, where we talk about the sustainability, we talk about the wider societal benefits, but we haven't really come to grips with the how do we quantify or measure them in an objective, consistent manner so we can compare between, so government and industry leaders are able to make those investment decisions. So simple answer is yes, absolutely critical.
And of course, Cam, just following up on that, that's exactly what's in our value framework. We have social capital, we have human capital, financial capital, natural capital, manufactured capital. So we have metrics and measures for all of those things that consider not just the capital phase, but the operational phase. And that's what we're developing. And they're the conversations we're having with government as a framework for which informed choices can be made and tailored choices to suit the particular needs of the individual project, the individual region, the needs of the user. All of this thing is providing a framework where people can make choices to meet their needs, but working within an ecosystem that doesn't allow them to say, I don't care about the environment, I don't care about social impact, I only care about how cheap I can buy it. We're trying to get that balanced scorecard for investment that runs through the whole investment lifecycle. Very happy to sort of follow up further with you, Cam, on that. I do apologize, I've got a CLC meeting now, so I'm going to have to dial off and say thank you to everyone and come back in and follow up with you later. But thank you very much to everyone.
Thanks, Keith. Right, we've got a couple of minutes left, but I've got one here from Michael Steck, and he originally addressed this to Cam, but actually I think, and then he sort of said, oh, didn't realise Tertia was there. So Tertia, would you suggest that the metrics in the report should be applied directly to early stage optioneering when deciding to convert a traditional in situ build into one that incorporates offsite? And are there any limits to how that would be done?
It's quite difficult when you're doing options appraisals to compare the two using this framework, because your outcomes are hypothetical. When you're doing options appraisal, so you don't know, it's based on your own judgment and your own engineering expertise and past experience about what you think the outcomes would be if you applied this particular methodology and compared it to another. So I don't think that that's where the benefit or the value of this framework or this methodology lies. What we really want to establish with this methodology is evidence of performance on projects, so that you will be able to use these metrics to forecast project performance using whatever information you have about a project. But you would be limited then to looking at things that are, you wouldn't be able to look at the whole life necessarily because you don't have information on that. So yeah, it could be used for that, but I don't think that's where the value lies.
Okay, thanks. Well, sorry folks, we're virtually out of time. There's one final question which came from Cara Parrott, which is why is it important to have a robust evidence base of the performance of off-site construction? And if it's okay with the panel, I'd like to pick that one up and give a very short answer. And the simple short answer is that we haven't proven that off-site construction has a benefit. We've talked about it for a long time. We know that in sectors like hotels and rapid developments like schools and hospitals, fast food restaurants, forecourts, supermarkets, there are benefits. And the measures that are contained within the methodology will have different weightings into different sectors. So the evidence base is driven by the metrics, but it's also driven by what the business drivers are in each of those sectors. And that's why this report is important, because it gives us a level playing field of different metrics. So we are, hopefully that answers that question for Cara. Thanks to everybody who's joined us today for the webinar. Thanks to our speakers, Robert, Keith, Joanne, Tertia, Campbell, Kieran, thanks for sharing your knowledge and expertise. There are lots of questions, and the team at CIRIA and the Laing O'Rourke Centre will follow up with written answers to all of the outstanding questions for the attendees. I'd like to remind you that the guide is free to download from the CIRIA bookstore. The details are on screen, and we'll email that link to all of the attendees. So thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully that was informative. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.